Hey guys, what's going on? I'm going to be doing another optimization video today for another Nightdive game. Today we're going to be covering the thing. We're also going to be covering various bugs and glitches and things that Nightdive introduced, things that they didn't introduce, and the difference between the two. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the thing was originally released back on OG Xbox back in the day. And it was released by Vivendi Universal back when they were still around. And so it had a lot of issues and stuff. It had really wonky controls. And so I was really, really excited when Nightdive decided to just kind of shadow drop this out of nowhere. And, I was pretty excited for it. So let's go ahead and get through these menus here. We'll get down to it. Amongst all the other projects that Nightdive has worked on, I think the thing is way more polished. There wasn't really any issues with this game that I could see that Kex introduced, and it's been a pretty smooth experience. Played it a couple times. It's a relatively short game, but it was still fun nonetheless. So let's see here. So they included a bunch of things. It has achievement support and stuff for the Switch, which I don't really pay attention to. It's nice that we have a vault and a field manual. The vault's really, really nice because I don't think we ever had access to this, back when I was younger and stuff. So it's actually really nice to see them go and include all of this mess. And they did a pretty good job modernizing the controls as well. So if we go down and we hit gameplay, the difficulty is a lot more forgiving this time around. It was not forgiving at all on the original run, and then they have nice things like auto aim, toggle crouch, and glowing pickups, and they also have a option for old school aim, which I don't really recommend at all. The old school aim is really, really bad. You're not really missing anything whatsoever. So let's go ahead and get into the display. So this game runs pretty well right off the bat. It's one of the few Nightdive games that they released on Switch where anti-aliasing doesn't go and break things. The color grading is just a little bit of color correction. The old game is actually really, really bland looking with like this weird kind of grayish brown kind of filter over it. And then they added nice things like depth of field, bloom, and everything else, and you can just go ahead and leave it alone. To play the thing, all you have to do is just pick it up and just start a fresh game, and you're good to go. It pretty much plays itself right out of the box. So, we're going to go ahead and load up a game that I have an autosave for already because we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of things. So, a lot of people seem to think with Nightdive that when they go and they get a game that they fix all the bugs and, that it's always going to be a happy ending, and that is not always the case. With Nightdive games, you have two categories of bugs. And I believe that other developers that go and bring out these older games as well and bring them back have the same damn problem. It's not just Nightdive that suffers from this. Aspyr also has these issues as well with all of the Star Wars games that they've released on the Switch and they've had to go through and patch. So you have two types of bugs. You have the bugs that are introduced with the Kex engine or whatever type of emulation that they're trying to go ahead and do with it. And then you have the original bugs that shipped with the game. And a lot of people seem to believe that whenever a game like this is re-released that all the bugs are fixed and everything else. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about an example of it. You have two types of bugs. You have the ones that Kex introduces, which Nightdive I think is more keen to actually go and solve, and then you have the original bugs that shipped with the game. So I remember as a kid playing this game, it would encourage you to go and explore these outer fence lines. You would go and you would follow the fence line, and there would be like a lot of stuff that you could go and find, and it was really, really nice. And you could kind of go and just patrol the outer perimeter a fair bit. And what would end up happening on the original release is the the map would literally give out, and you would fall straight through it. You'd fall through it, you would die, shit would happen, it'd be awful, you'd have to reload the save and everything else. And so this is a bug that is just native to the game. Back then, games were not really patched or anything like that on console. They didn't really have the capacity. So you just kind of learn to live with it and stuff. And there's also a lot of physics issues that go on with this game as well. And again, it just kind of shipped with the original title, and there's really just not much that you can go and do about it. So a lot of the time when I go and I see people go and they play these games, they say, "Oh wow, it's really really buggy, and it's all Kex's fault," and that's not always the case. I mean, as much as I like to give the Kex engine a heap of shit for a lot of the bugs that it introduces and stuff, not all the bugs are going to be the fault of the engine. So it's just kind of one of those things. So as I finish dying here, we're going to go ahead and reload the game. So when you go around the perimeter, the map has a tendency to swallow you a lot of the time. There's also other problems with this game as well, where it would just occasionally lock up. It had a fair bit of sound bugs, and it's just something that was, with the original title. It's just part of the original software. They never went through, they never fixed it, and, that's okay. I need to turn off the friggin' aim, the gyroscopic aim. Oh my god. Alright, let's see here. Yep, that's it. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and turn that off, because I like aiming normally. I mean, gyroscopic aim is pretty good stuff. It, however, is not for me. So, with that thought in mind, a lot of people don't really realize this. They think that every single bug that these games have are coming from the Kex engine, and that is not always the case. So the Kex engine does introduce a couple of bugs, and I think that Nightdive has had a okay track record with trying to go and squash them, more or less. And so that's always something that has been a thing with Nightdive, as they've always been worried about going and getting Kex squared away first. And then, they try to go and fix other bugs as well. And it depends on what kind of funding they're given, how much the person that owns the IP, the company that owns the IP, is willing to pay, and things like that. Like I'm sure that when they went ahead and worked on Blood and Quake, the budget was something that they had to factor in. I know with Blood, it was quite the shit show, and it just really did not do very well at all in terms of how well it had been released. It's so buggy that people just went back to the original release, and that was pretty much it.
Okay.
So it was just something that you kind of went and you had to go and deal with and everything else. And so not every game that they go and work on is going to be flawless. I know with Blood, they were still a relatively new company when they were going and working on it, and as far as I'm aware, Atari actually owns the IP, and they just didn't want to do, more funding to go and fix it and stuff. They didn't want to sit down and say, well, we're going to go ahead and just sink all of this money into it to try to fix it and stuff. It wasn't really happening. I think let's see, squad members are always conscious of their circumstances. See a squad member holding up on the squad menu, look at each other, picture, doing okay, casually left and right, but shaking uncontrollably. But, it's just one of those things, because a lot of the time what ends up happening is most gamers have this tendency to think that they can just keep patching the game, and that everything will be fine, and they could just keep working on it forever. And what a lot of people don't realize is when you go and you do things like this, development in general, you have to function within a specific budget. And then what you do in that budget is going to be reviewed later, and outside factors are going to literally dictate whether or not you get to go and continue working on it, more or less. We would see this a lot in the 80s, 90s, and all the way up to the early 2000s. And it was just kind of one of those things, games would be rushed out kind of quick. And then what would end up happening is you would just kind of go and you would receive this game really, really early on and stuff. And from there, you would just kind of go and have to deal with whatever issues it had because, the developer does not always get to go and control, what funding they get and stuff. I mean, if it's a small developer, sometimes, especially if they self-publish on top of it, but if it's like a developer that is owned by a really, really large publisher, then yeah, they don't really get control over that, and it just kind of happens. So you can't always go and control, what work is done and things like that. And so sometimes you're kind of given what you're given, and that's pretty much it. So this concept kind of eludes most gamers, I think. They think that it just goes on forever, and that's not always the case. So we're going to go ahead and end game here, I think. And we're just going to mess around in the vault for a little bit. But a lot of people just don't really realize that. So I think as time has gone on, a lot of people, since they can't really tell the difference between native bugs and bugs that Kex introduces, they think that all the bugs are coming from Nightdive. Like it's just this thing that they believe where every game that came out back then was just inherently bugless, and that is not the case. That is nowhere near the case. And so I noticed when the thing had rolled out, a lot of people were kind of complaining about it. They said, "Oh, this game's really buggy. You guys didn't do a very good job." And here's the thing: they're not in control of these inherent, software bugs a lot of the time, unless they have access to a whole mess of code that will allow them to go and fix it. And so a lot of gamers kind of, I think, slipped up a fair bit with it. The release itself is actually pretty solid. You can run it right out of the box. You don't really have to do anything. But as you go through and play this game, you are going to run into a bunch of inherent bugs that have been there literally since the early 2000s. And so my entire time playing this game, I had only noticed two bugs, really. One of them was a really, really obscure frame dip, which I'm pretty sure that was just a memory leak somewhere, which has thus been patched. And then the other one is that on the Switch, it would just randomly quit to the home menu, and it just wasn't, it happened like twice throughout the 9 runs that I did of this game. And, both of those are problems with Kex because I never experienced that on Xbox back when, I was younger, unless it was from another port that I wasn't aware of. But outside of that, the game itself is very solid. You're going to be running into a fair bit of inherent bugs. You're going to fall through the map. You're going to have audio issues. The game itself actually has a fair bit of limitations. I know that if you have too many flames on the screen, or if too many explosives go off, the game will chug for a minute. And, that was something that happened even back on OG Xbox, and a lot of people didn't really realize that, because a lot of the people that go and play these games, strangely enough, are not old heads. They're not like me where they actually remember these titles rolling out. A lot of the people that have been complaining the last while are people that are in their teens and early 20s that definitely do not remember this game. They may remember some of it if they can remember that far back, but they certainly weren't in their teens at that point or their early 20s or anything like that. So a lot of the complaining I've been seeing, it really isn't justified. I mean, I love to rag on the Kex engine, and I love to rag on a lot of Nightdive's ports and stuff, especially if it's not done well like Blood or Quake, but at the end of the day, these bugs, a lot of these bugs are just already here. And sometimes Nightdive can't always go through and fix them. A lot of it is very ad hoc sometimes. It's definitely an on-the-fly thing, and you just kind of have to go and work with what you got. And so we saw that with quite a few of the games that they released. We saw that with Blade Runner as well. Like, they had to sit there and work around a lot of Blade Runner's bullshit for a while, and then you have to factor in other things like the time constraint that they have to exist in, more or less, and then they have to also go and keep it on budget, unless whoever the hell is going and allowing them to do the work gives them more funding. There's just a lot of things that come into play, and a lot of people just don't really realize that. So the total list of bugs that you're actually going to find in the thing is kind of longish. There's a pretty good chance that you're going to fall out of the map. The game can slow down if you have a lot of flames on screen. The frame rate tanks if you blow up a bunch of barrels. It gets worse if you're blowing up a bunch of barrels with a flamethrower. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that, you know, you're going to run into. A lot of the times the AI does not want to listen to you. This is not a problem with the Kex engine. This was a problem even on the original version. You know, there's a chance that cutscenes will literally go and just lock up. And, you know, that was on the Xbox port. It's nothing entirely unusual. You know, there's just a lot to it and stuff. And so when I had looked at the reviews for the re-release, I was actually really disappointed because there was two camps of people that were kind of talking about it. You had the first camp that was like, oh man, I remember how, you know, bad this game was, and Nightdive did a really, really good job going and fixing up most of the issues. It's really playable now, especially with the updated controls and gyroscopic aim and everything else. And then you had the other camp of folks that would look at this game, they would play it, experience bugs that are 20 years old at this point, well, hell, probably older than that, and they would say, oh, you know, this is because they used the Kex engine, and that is not the case. You know, it's really not, because you can replicate these bugs very easily on a original copy. So it's a little bit disheartening, because a lot of the time I go and I look at like a lot of the work that they do, and most of it is actually really, really nice. You go, you look at it, and you say to yourself, okay, you know, they did a really, really good job with this, because some of us actually remember how bad the game used to be. I mean, it was a decent game, but, you know, back when we were still learning how to use thumbsticks and stuff, a lot of shit was just really sketchy, and that's just kind of how that is. And so for Nightdive to come in and say, we're going to try to fix it up as much as we can, we're going to try to modernize all this crap, you know, and we're going to try to add bells and whistles and better lighting, and you know, for them to come in and actually think that this game is worthy of bringing back from the depths, I think is really, really great. But I do get frustrated a lot of the time when people that aren't even old enough to, you know, remember the game or even be around when the game was released, try to open their mouths about things that they have no knowledge of. I know one person was going and bitching about the classic controls, and they asked, you know, why they were even included and if they were so bad, and it's because people actually went and played the game like that. They went and they rocked it with, you know, tank controls and everything else, and, you know, tank controls for games like this were kind of the standard back then. You know, it took a really long time for tank controls to wear off. I mean, fuck, even Resident Evil 4 was still using them when it was released. The only difference is it went from a third-person kind of over-the-shoulder shooter perspective. You know, Resident Evil 4 gave us that. And so, you know, people were going and whining about the controls and asking, you know, why is this, you know, still here if they were so bad? And it's mainly for, you know, people that remember the game and wanted to have a classic experience, because with Nightdive, it's not always about enhancement. Sometimes it's just about preserving what you know and love, and that's just kind of how that is. But other bugs you're going to encounter is sometimes the cutscenes are going to lock up. There's going to be other times where the final boss just does not spawn in. And again, that's not a Kex problem. That is a this game was buggy as hell on release problem. You know, like Vivendi Universal back then, pretty much all of their games were very, very buggy. You know, they were kind of like a middle tier publisher and stuff, and, you know, like, they weren't quite indie, but they really weren't quite AAA. You know, they were kind of like in this little kind of middling space that we would typically go and see out of companies like THQ, back when THQ was in their original form, you know, before Nordic Games went ahead and bought them out. you know, before that merger happened and they started scooping up IPs and stuff. But I wish a lot of people would actually kind of go and realize this, you know, just because, you know, you encounter bugs in a game, it doesn't generally mean that the people that were going and porting it did a bad job. It doesn't mean that it's a product of the engine that, you know, they're using. Sometimes some games are just really buggy. I know that all of Vivendi Universal's games were extremely buggy. You know, this isn't a clear-cut case like what happened with Quake and Blood, where, you know, it was just done so badly that, you know, it's just kind of riddled with problems left and right. This is a case of, this is a very old game that was rushed out the door way too soon. Didn't have access to adequate patching back then, you know, so Nightdive has to make do with what they have, try to fix it up as much as they can. But overall, it's a very solid port. It runs very, very well on the Switch. It's pretty much a locked 60 all the time with all the enhancements, and that's one thing that I do like about them. They always try to shoot for 60 when they can because they want the experience to be playable. They went through, they fixed a lot of the aiming issues that the original game had, because it used to be that you would go and fire at things and it wouldn't always register. They fixed like 95% of that. You still miss the occasional oddball shot, but they fixed most of it. They redid a lot of the models, you know, there's just so much stuff that they went ahead and redid, and it was just really, really nice with how they went about going and doing it. So, is the game perfect? It's about as perfect as it's ever going to get. This game has a lot of inherent problems that they really just can't fix, and that's okay. However, what they did do is they fixed the major problems. The game is almost running at a locked 60 all the time, no matter what platform you're playing it on. That's great. They fixed the aiming issues. We now have access to using 2 thumbsticks. You know, modern controls is a very huge thing. The cutscenes do not always crash now. That's great. The ending boss still disappears occasionally, but it's not as prominent. That's also great. You know, they fixed up a lot of the audio bugs. That's great. The AI is still a mess. You have to tell them what to do multiple times, and that is okay. That's not something that I believe that they can fix because it's just so deeply ingrained. Some problems you just can't fix. They did a good job redrawing all of the flame effects. That's great. All of the monsters have been cleaned up and spawned in. They spawn in correctly now, which is a big one because it used to be the game would kind of soft lock because things just wouldn't spawn in correctly. That's fine. They did a good job with it. It runs flawlessly on the Switch right out of the box almost. You don't have to modify any of the settings. You don't have to turn off bloom or anti-aliasing or anything really. They even went through and they fixed a lot of the color correction, which is really, really nice. There's just a lot that this game did, and they wanted to flesh that out. And I can tell that they wanted to flesh it out because they kind of went the distance with it. They kind of got to a point where they were like, hey, you know, we're going to go ahead and we're going to try to fix all of this stuff. And they did a good job with it. You know, I can't really complain. Like, it's really, really rare when I go and I get one of their games and I don't really have anything to tweak or tune or things to go and whine about. I mean, it's just not something that I have to go and contend with, which is really, really nice. And so I tip my hat to them in that regard, for them to be able to not only identify various problems, but to go the distance in fixing them, while adding other niceties like better shadowing and better light dynamics, and redoing the monster models, because the original monster models, while pretty scary for the time, are pretty damn dumb by today's standards. For them to go and redraw that and clean it up and everything else, that's great. You know, so I wish a lot of the younger demographic would just kind of stop whining about it, because it's a solid port. They fixed a lot of issues that this game has, and that's great, because I don't even think, by today's standards, I honestly don't think that the current player base would even be able to stomach it. They wouldn't be down with the aiming system. They wouldn't want to deal with any of the bugs. They just would not want to deal with any of it. They'd probably look at the visuals and say, that's really ugly. For them to literally go and bring it in and, make it 16 by 9 when the original was 4 by 3 is really, really nice. For them to go and clean up the audio is really, really nice. They've done really, really well. And this is something that I've noticed about Nightdive, over the last couple of years. It used to be their initial releases were very, very rough. Extremely rough. And now, as the years have gone by, because they've been around for a hot minute now, as the years have gone by, they've spent more time polishing their ports, which is what we need. It's honestly, we just need nothing but polish on all of these ports. The engine is fine, the visuals are fine, the updated textures and everything else, the anti-aliasing, all of it is fine. But where they have routinely struggled is in optimization. They have struggled all to high hell. And so it's kind of been for Nightdive in general, it's kind of been a routine struggle. So the last couple of games that they have released, Quake 2 is in good shape. The Thing is in good shape. Blade Runner, for the most part, was in decent shape, and then they patched it fast, and now it's in really good shape. And since all their stuff, for the most part, is released digitally, you're not going to accidentally run across like an old version of it and say, oh my god, I'm having a really bad experience. They've actually done really, really well. Turok 3 released in really good shape. Turok 1 is in really good shape now. Like, they're finally getting around, pardon me, they're finally getting around to going and fixing this mess. And I'm really, really glad about it, because the more they optimized, the more polished the experience is. And if a lot of these younger folks are going to be playing these old-ass games, I really want them to just have a world-class experience with it. I want them to be like, oh, this is actually really fun. I like it. I know that when I had played The Thing originally back on OG Xbox in towards, the beginning of my college years, I literally had such an awful experience with it. The controls were bad, it was buggy, it was borderline damn near unplayable. And so for them to bring it back, update everything, fix as much as they can, polish it up as much as they can, get it running at a locked 60 for the most part, is great. Because that's the experience that I'd want a lot of these younger folks to have. I wouldn't want them to just struggle immensely, as they go about going and playing the game and everything else. I wouldn't want them to have to deal with routine crashes or enemies not spawning in or going and shooting something and not being able to go and hit it because the hit reg is all screwed up. There was also another problem we had with the original release where if you were going and you're picking up ammo, sometimes it wouldn't even register. They went out of their way to fix that, thank God. There was just a lot to it. And so as I watch Nightdive mature a fair bit, I kind of sit down and I say to myself, yeah, this is what it's about. And the cool thing is the Switch has more titles coming to it that I'm sure are going to be very well polished because they finally hit their stride with it. I know that they went ahead and re-released I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I mean, they went ahead and released it on PC first, which is fine because that's their primary platform that they goof off on. But they went ahead and released it on Switch. Runs great. I know that they're planning on going and re-releasing System Shock 2 on the Switch. And that's great because I've been waiting for that for years. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be polished as well. I mean, the game is, over 22, 23 years old now. So it should run on the Switch pretty amazingly if they just take time to polish it. So as far as the thing's concerned, it runs great. It still has the occasional issue. Please remember when playing this game that not every single issue that you run across has been introduced by Kex. A lot of these bugs are old as hell and have been here since day one. So, with that thought in mind, you can run the thing right out of the box. Be mindful of the bugs. If something's going on, just reboot the game. You'll be okay. You don't need to panic about it. Just reboot the game and continue having fun with it. So, that's going to go ahead and close it out for this chapter. Thank you for stopping by, guys. I appreciate you. And as always, please remember to be good to yourselves and each other. Take care.